I glanced over at the digital readout on the clock near the computer at the security desk. It read 12:41. About 20 minutes to go until the straggling students would have to vacate the library, and I'd be left to my own devices for 3 hours. I scoured the paper, reading and rereading the rules. I had already violated number 7, but even though that experience was certainly jarring, it didn't appear to have created any lasting damage. I surveyed the government original documents section at length and couldn't find any semblance of a clue that a man had just committed suicide. Maybe the author of the letter intended for me to start off my shift with an infraction. It definitely got my attention, and didn't really cause any harm. Well, okay, obviously I was still a little fucked up from watching that horrific sequence, but my prolonged search for any sign of the interaction yielding no results had allowed me to calm down somewhat. My thoughts were interrupted by a shocking chime coming through the PA system.
Attention library patrons, the library will be closing in 10 minutes. Please make your final selections and exit the library. Have a good night.
The last few students that were holed up in the 3rd floor study area walked down the stairs past me and out the door.
Have a splendid evening, my good man. I do apologize for my belligerence earlier. 'Twas not intended to be an assault on your character. You seem like a sublime chap.
The Chinese exchange student from my previous encounter said as he tipped his top hat and exited through the main set of doors with his compatriots. Fuck, that was eloquent. With the holdouts having all trickled out from the massive interior of the library, I was all alone in the gargantuan building. Or so I hoped. I took a shaky breath and walked away from the desk to begin my first perimeter sweep of the library. I started in the basement. The basement has a network of corridors that are not utilised by the student body or the general public, and are mostly only frequented by library staff. These hallways compose a pretty complex labyrinth of pathways that I certainly hadn't mastered yet. The hallways had sharp, biting angles, and accordingly had hallway safety mirrors in the upper corner of the ceiling. I know that they had saved me from bumping into another staff member who was coming the opposite direction a few times earlier that evening. I approached the first sharp turn in the network of hallways, and my eyes instinctually gravitated upwards. The advice of the letter came back to me just in time. Rule 1. Never look at the hallway safety mirrors in the basement corridor. Keep your eyes low and walk swiftly. I averted my eyes back down to the floor and turned the corner briskly. The coast was clear. No big deal, I thought. I continued walking deeper into the heart of the basement. Some important background information about the composition of the basement is that most library staff members will never actually lay eyes on the majority of the floor. The staff hallways exist on the periphery of a massive area that is closed off to everyone but the most privileged security personnel. This portion of the basement belonged to the State Historical Society and was well fortified. No one that I knew had ever actually entered into that portion of the basement. I had just finished my perimeter sweep of the basement and was beginning to turn around to return to the stairs near the security desk, when I heard deep and ragged breaths coming from around the corner. "Hello?" I shouted out reflexively. There was no response, just the continuation of the deep and uneven breaths. I was stuck. I had to walk past that hallway to get out of the maze of corridors that I had embedded myself in. The temptation to just look up at the mirror that I knew was conveniently located at the turn in the hallway was immense. Why encounter the unknown and potentially dangerous without having any idea of what it is you're about to confront? If I looked at the mirror, I would know what the source of that horrid breathing was without having to face it head on. And it definitely wasn't moving. I had heard no sound of approach, and the breathing sounded just as loud as it had been when I first heard it. But I had made a promise to myself to adhere to the rules, and I had already seen the results of disobeying these guidelines firsthand. I took a deep breath and careened around the corner, eyes shut and head down. I stood there for a moment, afraid to raise my gaze. As I did, I saw the hallway in its entirety. Nothing amiss. Whatever had made those noises wasn't in this stretch of hallway anymore. There's one point for the follow the rules approach, I thought. Hastily, I made my way back to the stairs and ascended to the second floor, anxious to leave the cramped quarters of those damned hallways behind me. My sweep of the second floor was much less exciting, and I completed it without incident in about 20 minutes. I walked up to the third floor, and aside from a bat flying over my head and scaring the piss out of me, that too was uneventful. I was getting ready to embark on the stairs up to the fourth floor when I heard the sound of the library main doors opening 2 floors below. Those doors had been locked for nearly an hour now. It made no sense that they could be open from the exterior. Hesitantly, I inched my way down the stairs, staying alert for any indication that someone could be inside the library. When I turned the corner on the stairs to walk down the last flight of stairs that opened up into the atrium, I was shocked to see 2 grey poles at the foot of the stairs. What the fuck? I thought. And then my blood ran cold with a realization. Those weren't poles. They were legs. Long, slender legs. From the top of the stairs, I could see to about chest height of whatever monstrosity was standing at the bottom of the staircase. I recoiled, backing into the wall. He spoke in a deep baritone voice that vibrated my bones.
I know that you are up there.
My breath caught in my throat, and I stood as still as I could. He spoke quietly, but the immense depth of his voice rumbled through the air like a clap of thunder.
Are you afraid?
Remembering the advice from the rules, answer any question he asks you with no sir, and he will go away. I squeaked out, "No sir."
Then you're fucking stupid. Are you fucking stupid?
The voice had taken on a menacing tone, booming in the small staircase. "No sir," I said as confidently as I could.
Would you like to see my face?
"No sir," I replied. He stood motionless for a few more moments. Blood had begun to stain the upper reaches of his visible clothing, turning his great suit a deep crimson. I watched thick, wet drops roll off of his sleeves and past his long, bony fingers as they plopped onto the linoleum. A few more seconds went by, and the man abruptly turned around and strolled away from the stairs. I checked my watch. 3:03 a.m. The library was eerily quiet. The silence felt deafening. I felt as if the world was closing in around me. My wheezing breaths, a product of me trying to calm down, filled the staircase with noise. But I didn't feel alone. It's a horrifying sensation to feel as vulnerable as I did then. These monstrosities were coming and going with impunity. I couldn't stop them or control them, and I was left to navigate these horrifying interactions with only a stupid fucking piece of paper as my guide. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was a baby-backed bitch for a few minutes. I sat with my back to the wall on the staircase and tried to think. Okay, that was horrifying, I thought, getting the obvious out the way, but it still went exactly as the letter predicted. The tall man hadn't rushed me or tried to harm me, even though he certainly seemed capable of inflicting damage. I abided by the instructions, and I emerged totally unscathed. At every turn, the letter had proved both valid and valuable. The information I received was clearly comprehensive and ostensibly accurate. The guy that I took over for had done the job for months and he was still alive. I could get through one night. I checked my watch. 3:21 a.m. I walked down the staircase and returned to the security desk. I quickly reviewed the letter. Rule number 1. Never look at the hallway safety mirrors in the basement corridor, keep your eyes low and walk swiftly. Rule number 2. You will encounter an unfathomably tall man in a grey suit. Do not look at his face, answer any question he asks you with no sir and he will go away. Rule number 3. Stay out of the atrium from 2:15 to 2:16 every night. It's better if you don't see it. Rule number 4, you will hear some horrible fucking sounds from study room 219J on occasion. Don't ever open the door. Rule number 5, always walk beside the bookshelves in the west portion of the 4th floor, never between them. Rule number 6, if you hear tapping coming from the glass window behind you at the security desk, do not turn around. Rule number 7, at 12:15 you'll see a heavy man in a tweed suit hurry past you clutching his briefcase. When you see him walk past you, tell him, "Today is not the day, friend." He'll look relieved, nod and walk out of the library. If he gets up the stairs, you're already too late. I had already dealt with our tweed-clad pal, encountered knockoff Slenderman, and I had made sure I was in another location in the library other than the atrium from 2:15 to 2:16, so that wasn't a concern. That left Rule 1, 4, 5 and 6 as threats still in play. Rule 1 seemed pretty easy. I already followed it successfully and stayed safe. Rule 4 seems straightforward enough. Just have to steer clear of the second floor study rooms. Rule 5 would only be a concern when I entered the 4th floor, which only happened once a night for the security sweep, and I didn't need to enter the bookshelf aisles for any reason. Rule 6... My thoughts were interrupted by a faint ticking sound from behind me. I was initially puzzled. The only thing behind me was the glass window embossed with our university sigil. I thought it must have been a twig or something being blown into the window as it was extremely windy that night. I was turning around to investigate when I stopped just in time and recalled the contents of Rule 6, the very rule that I was interrupted while reading. Rule number 6. If you hear tapping coming from the glass window behind you at the security desk, do not turn around. I realized that what I thought was a twig was much more deliberate and sharp sounding than a stray twig. It had increased in both frequency and volume to the point where it had to be performed by a person. It wasn't a twig I had heard, it was the click of a fingernail on glass. Someone had to be standing inches behind me, right up against the window pane. The tapping, which had started out as slow and deliberate, had sped up and was clearly more forceful than it had been a moment ago. The tapping was almost frantic. It became difficult to distinguish one tap from another. Fuck this! I promptly stood up, walked around the side of the desk and basically sprinted to the stairs, leaving whatever fucked up entity was tapping on the window in my dust. I laughed to myself when I was safely on the second floor. I always wondered why the protagonist in horror movies didn't just walk away instead of lingering in the demon-possessed area. And here I'd gone and done it. Not so hard. I sat up in the second floor commons and flipped through Tinder on my phone. I checked my watch. 3:53 AM. Well shit. I've survived the most whack library on planet Earth. Before leaving, I had to put my black university-issued work polo in the employee garment cabinet downstairs. It was a bit of a walk and I thought about just taking the polo with me, but I didn't want to end my first shift by breaking the library protocol. I sighed and strolled down the stairs, stealing a glance at the window behind the desk as I did. Totally normal. I was practically beaming with catharsis when I entered into the network of hallways, feet away from tossing my polo back in the cabinet and booking it home. When I came upon the first turn, my eyes naturally flitted up the wall, and my blood turned to ice. I had been so caught up in the promise of leaving the library that I had forgotten rule number 1. I froze, feet from the corner with my eyes transfixed on the hallway mirror. I couldn't believe my eyes. Staring back into the mirror, feet away from me on the other side of the wall, was a man. His skin was jet black, his clothes were in tatters, held together by a few threads. He was barefoot and a massive human, at least 6'6", and riddled with muscles. His eyes were wild. They shone a chilling yellow in the reflection, locked with my stare. But the most noticeable thing about him was his face. His cheeks had been sliced from the corners of his mouth nearly to his ears, causing his face to droop forward, wet blood bubbling around his white teeth. A moment passed where we held each other's gaze, his breathing unbelievably loud, shuddering his whole ribcage as he inhaled and exhaled rapidly. Then the lights in the hallway went out. I saw his yellow eyes widen, and a piercing shriek filled the hallway. I heard footsteps thundering around the corner. Breaking out of my fear-induced paralysis, I jolted and began sprinting away from the corner, back towards the atrium. I heard the man closing in on me, that shriek coming from just a foot or two behind me, ripping into my ears. Just as he was nearly on me, the screaming stopped. The footsteps stopped. The lights flicked on, and I whirled around to find myself alone in the hallway. There was no sign of the man anywhere, but the door on the right side of the hallway was flung wide open. I was shocked, as this was the first time I'd ever heard of that area being unlocked. The door read. Quickly, I ran to the door, slammed it shut, and ran out the door of the library, throwing my work polo on the desk as I ran by and hastily locking the door behind me. I had finished my first shift.